Let's move on to our second main topic today. And our second main topic today gets submitted to us by Gavin Gouge. And Gavin writes, "Hi, John. Bill and Ted Face the Music is apparently now releasing in select theaters and on VOD on September 1st. Could we see more expensive movies adopting this hybrid strategy to release on their original intended dates in a time when movie theaters are open again? Thanks, and bring on the filthy." All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, man. And yes, this just kind of came out this morning. For those of you who may not have caught this news already, Bill and Ted Face the Music, Bill and Ted 3, is going to VOD. It will be released on September 1st. That is the word coming out about it. It's going to be released on September 1st. Now, the official word is it's going to be released on VOD and theaters at the same time. You have to put, as Hollywood Reporter in this article here points out very clearly, you have to put a giant asterisk. Let's just get this out of the way first. You have to put a giant asterisk beside in theaters. Because the reality is the vast majority of movie theaters will not allow Bill and Ted Face the Music to play on their screens because it's going to go on to streaming on the same day. The NATO, the North American Theater Owners Association, which is, members AMC, Regal, Cinemark, Landmark, on and on and on and on and on. Most of the movie theaters, not all, certainly not all of them, but a lot of them, the majority of movie theaters in this country, part of NATO. NATO has a rule that says we will not play movies on our screens that you try to release what's called day and date. We will not allow you to release movies into our theaters that you're also putting on streaming on the same day. That's of no benefit to us. We won't allow it. That's why there was a bunch of confusion. Remember when AMC was saying we're not going to play Universal movies anymore? I kept trying to explain to people, AMC never said they weren't going to play Universal movies anymore, period. They said they weren't going to play any Universal movies in their theaters that also tried to release on day and date, that tried to release in that method the way they did with Trolls World Tour. But that's not just AMC. That's all the movie theaters. That's Regal, that's Cinemark, that's all the theaters of NATO. So while they say that they're going to be releasing this on VOD and in theaters at the same time, that's kind of not true. There are going to be some local independently owned theaters here and there that may put it up on the screen. Hell, you may even see it in a couple of drive-in theaters, but don't expect it to get any sort of significant release in whatever theaters are open on September 1st. So let's just be clear about that. One of the things I find really funny about this particular story is the fact, if you guys watch the show regularly, you guys know that it was just, like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, somebody asked the question, "Hey, John, do you think you could see a Bill and Ted 3 going to VOD and streaming?" And I said on the show, for those of you guys who watched and remember, I said, you know what? Bill and Ted is actually one of those movies I think could very well go to streaming, and it could make sense. Because let's look at a couple of facts here. Number one, Bill and Ted's not that expensive, wasn't an expensive movie to make. I can't remember the exact numbers, but I remember we talked about the budget of the film. It's a low budget film by Hollywood standards. It's a low budget film. So it's not all that expensive to make. They don't need to make a ton of money. And let's be honest, Bill and Ted Face the Music was never going to be a box office hit anyway. Like, it wasn't going to be $400 million at the box office anyway. So I remember we talked about, you know what, if any movie makes sense to go to streaming that's kind of on the plate right now, Bill and Ted 3 is actually a good candidate for that. Because it's not going to suffer much from making like a higher budget movie, a movie that does need to make money. It's not going to suffer nearly as much going to straight to VOD. It actually could benefit from it. And here we are now talking about Bill and Ted, and it's going to be going to streaming. And listen, I still believe what I thought a week or two ago. This actually isn't a bad move. Because I know a lot of you disagreed with me, but I am telling you, I do not think, and obviously the studio agrees with me, Bill and Ted was not going to make a ton of money at the box office. I think it could have made enough to break even and even make a little bit of money because they kept the budget pretty low. And it definitely has a nostalgia factor. And by the way, that nostalgia factor, I think, is another thing to take into consideration. The nostalgia factor of Bill and Ted, I think, plays well into its move to VOD. A lot of other movies that don't have built-in brand recognizability, don't have built-in brand IP awareness, don't have built-in nostalgia factors built in, they could struggle even more on VOD. But something like Bill and Ted, that's a recognizable IP, has a huge nostalgia factor, that could play, I think, very well into its move over VOD. So I got to say, I'm not surprised. I mean, I also wouldn't have been surprised if they kept their theatrical date. I wouldn't have been surprised at all if they did, but I'm not surprised, and I don't think it's a bad move for them. And I wanted to know, what did you guys think about this? So I decided to make that the topic of today's question of the day. And I put the questions of the day up on the community tab on our YouTube channel. Make sure you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel to go and see that stuff as well. And I put this up just before the show started. And I asked you guys this: considering it wasn't that expensive to make and that it wasn't going to make a ton of money at the box office, was moving Bill and Ted 3 to VOD release a good idea? So far, a little over 2,200 of you guys have responded, and 86% of you are saying, yes, it's a good move. And I agree. I got to say, Gary, still 14% of you are saying, no, it's a bad move. And you might end up being right. You could end up being right about that. But I think this is a prime, if you're going to do it with any movie, this is a prime movie to do it with. Now, getting back to the question that was sent in by Gavin here. Do I think we could see more expensive movies adopting this hybrid strategy of releasing on streaming and in theaters at the same time? The answer to that is not really. There might be one or two isolated examples of it, but I don't think much because, number one, because they're more expensive movies, that means they need to make more money. The more expensive movies need to make more money, and has already been established, you're not going to make a ton on VOD. But of course, the second big problem is, as we talked a little bit earlier, the movie theaters like AMC, Regal, Cinemark, the big players will not allow a bigger movie, let's say like a James Bond, right? Just for argument's sake. If James Bond wanted to release on VOD the same day they put it out in theaters, the theaters are just going to say, we're not going to let your movie play on our screens. And then James Bond will be losing out on $900 million of revenue. And the theaters will be losing out on some revenue too, but they've got to draw a line in the sand. So I don't think we're going to see it. There could be one or two exceptions. There could theoretically be one or two exceptions to that. But I think as on a whole, no, I think Bill and Ted 3 is just a uniquely positioned property. Like we said a couple of weeks ago, I think Bill and Ted 3 is a uniquely positioned property that could benefit from this move. But I don't think a lot of the other movies like this, not a lot of them, especially the bigger ones, find themselves in the same situation. But that's just my take on it. Guys, question is, what do you think about that move? Jump on down to the comments section below and let us know your thoughts. All right.